نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. Hope everyone's doing well. So this is our lecture 9, and before we kind of move on to our final few lectures in which we discuss some of the more practical implications of what we've so far discussed, there was one topic that we did not cover, so we're going to use this lesson to cover it. So there'll be a bit of a slight rehash of what we said before, but we're going to try to give not to repeat all of that. But that's the topic of Ahlul Ra'i and Ahlul Hadith, right? Ahlul Ra'i and Ahlul Hadith. We've mentioned the term Ahlul Ra'i a couple of times, and I did say we're going to explain it. But in the previous lessons, we weren't given the opportunity to, or I did not find opportunity to discuss the topic of Ahlul Ra'i and Ahlul Hadith in any meaningful detail. So quite clear, the term itself is relatively self-explanatory. So Ahlul Ra'i refers to the people of opinion, and Ahlul Hadith refers to the people of Hadith, right? And this binary kind of gives a suggestion that you have on one side people that are not using Hadith, are using their mind alone, and the other side you have people that are using Hadith alone but not using their mind at all, right? So in both these instances, these statements, of course there is what is known as al-itlaq, right? There's a itlaq, which is something which you mention unrestrictedly, and they require someone to restrict it. So what we're going to look at in this lecture, inshallah, and I'll be giving citations as well, is that what does the Ahlul Ra'i Ahlul Hadith, is it a meaningful distinction, right? Is Ahlul Ra'i Ahlul Hadith a meaningful distinction, or is it just a derogative term, Ahlul Ra'i, that was invented by the Ahlul Hadith? And furthermore, if we are to say that it is a meaningful distinction, then what exactly is it that differentiates the Ahlul Ra'i and Ahlul Hadith? What makes someone from the Ahlul Ra'i and what makes someone from the Ahlul Hadith? Is there a clear demarcator between the two? Now, in the previous lectures, we had discussed the topic of Sahaba and the ikhtilaf amongst the fiqh amongst the Sahaba, and the ikhtilaf that kind of emerged amongst the Sahaba when it comes to fiqhi issues. Some of the books to kind of keep an eye out for which are relevant to our topic. I'm going to mention 3 works. You have one which is the I'lam Waqi'in by Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. These are all classical works. So I'lam Waqi'in by Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, where you have quite a detailed exposition of the way fiqh was done during the era of the Sahaba, and this notion of Ra'yi, and in contrast to Hadith, is also explained because Ra'yi, which we've translated as an opinion, right? So these are basically positions which are not explicitly mentioned in the Quran and Sunnah, but one uses their mind to try to extrapolate or understand or qualify prophetic narrations, right? So that's what we refer to as Ra'yi. And the reason why this is important is because Ra'yi has there's many statements of Sahaba. There are some actually Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam as well, but Sahaba which condemn Ra'yi. They condemn Ra'yi, and so but then there's other places where it seems like they are applying Ra'yi, right? So someone has presented a hadith. So for example, when Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu narrates the hadith about the things that pass in front of a person praying salah, that breaks the salah, it was a donkey and a woman, he mentions. And so Aisha anha objects, saying, has he made us the same as donkeys? So there, Aisha anha's objection is on the rational grounds. How does the two make sense, right? So there's a ra'yi applied there, but then you have condemnation of ra'yi as well. So how does one reconcile the two? Similar narrations can also be found in the book by Ibn Abdul Barr, which is known as Jami' Bayan al-Ilm wa Fadlihi, right? And then another book that I'm gonna mention to you guys, which is also very useful, is because the Ra'yi then, because the second we say that you're basically speaking about something which the Nas has not explicitly mentioned, then that would also apply to Qiyas, Right? It applies to analogy. Qiyas also applies to that. So that's why some scholars such as Ibn Hazm, the literalists, the Zahiris, they rejected Qiyas and they said this comes under ar-ra'yul madhmum, condemnable ra'i. Right? So Ibn Hazm has got a book on this topic which is called As-Sadi' في الرد على من قال للقياس والرأي والتقليد. من قال رأي والتقليد والاستحسان والتعليل. Right, this is written by Ibn Hazm, and if you were to purchase a copy of it by Sheikh Mashhur Hassan Salman, there is also a refutation there provided, a historical refutation, and then there's one that he also refutes it as well. So it's a very useful book. It's quite large, where this discussion is the Ibn Hazm's objection to Ra'i and Qiyas more specifically is responded to in great details. These are just some works to kind of keep an eye out for. So some narrations, just to give an example, like condemn ra'i. You have the hadith which is attributed back to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says, "تفترق أمتي على بضع وسبعين فرقة أعظمها فتنة قوم يقيسون الدين برأيهم يحرمون به ما أحل الله ويحللون به ما حرم الله." So this is the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has been attributed as saying that my ummah will divide into more than 70 groups. The greatest of fitna amongst them is a group that would analogize their deen with their opinion. They will make haram what Allah has made halal, and they will make halal what Allah has made haram. Even beyond the authenticity of the hadith, those who ascribe or may define themselves as Ahlul Ra'i won't have a problem with this, because they would say that the Ra'i here that's condemned is that which is making haram what Allah has made halal, or making halal what Allah has made haram. So that's not something that we are doing, so it doesn't really apply to us. And there's a whole host of other narrations. For example, Umar al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu has actually saying, "Ittaqu ar-ra'ya fi dinikum," that be fearful, be aware, be warned of using one's own opinion in your deen. Right? Be careful of using one's in your deen. Alongside that, the same books like Jam' Bayan Ilm wa Fadlihi and I'lam Waqi'in, they have those narrations that also praise the usage of Ra'i. So there's a narration from Umar al-Khattab that he meets a man أنه لقي رجلا فقال ما صنعت فقال قضى على علي قضى علي وزيد بكذا فقال لو كنت أنا لقضيت بكذا. So a person comes and says to Umar al-Khattab that Ali and Zayd have given judgment of such and such. Umar al-Khattab said, if it was me, I would have said such and such, something different. فقال he said فما يمنعك والأمر إليك قال لو كنت أردك إلى كتاب الله وسنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لفعلت ولكني أردك إلى الرأي والرأي مشترك فلم ينقض ما قال علي وزيد ومثل هذا كثير لا يحصى. So here Umar al-Khattab says that if I was to, because they asked him, well, if that's your opinion, you're the one who's in authority, why don't you just decide what the ruling is? So Umar al-Khattab said that if it was me, if what my opinion was what Allah's Messenger has said, then I would have done so. But this is my opinion against their opinion. How am I to overrule based on opinion someone else's opinion? So this is an example of Ra'i being used. Sorry, one second. Sorry about that. My wife's phone just went off. So that is so there Umar al-Khattab is affirming Ra'i, and there he's warning against Ra'i. So despite narration appearing to condemn Ra'i, there are many praising it. Hence there's a need to divide the Ra'i into two categories: al-Ra'yul Madmoom and al-Ra'yul Mamduh. Right? That praiseworthy Ra'i and condemnable Ra'i. Right? Praiseworthy Ra'i and condemnable Ra'i. And so by doing so, one can make sense of both narrations. So how does one, what is praiseworthy Ra'i? Praiseworthy Ra'i is where Ra'i is used to understand what Allah's Messenger wants from us. Right? Understand what Allah's Messenger wants from us. And condemnable Ra'i is to use one's mind to overrule what Allah's Messenger wants from us. Right? There's a few other nuances here as well, but just for our basic idea, that is what we are referring to, that's what we mean. So if you look at the examples of Sahaba utilizing Ra'i, then you would see that it is all to, in fact, utilize to see what Allah's Messenger actually want from us. So example of this is for the Umar al-Khattab anhu is a great example of this. There are some recent scholars that have tried to kind of divide the Sahaba even into Ahlul Ra'yi and Ahlul Hadith, although that was not a term that was recognized by them. But the idea is that there are some Sahaba that are seen more commonly applying Ra'yi, and you have other Sahaba that are really applying Ra'yi. They're more strict to the Nas. So Umar al-Khattab anhu, despite him being such a a Sahabi that is one of the most, if not the most, loyal to what Allah's Messenger have said, but you still have that doesn't go against the fact that he would also utilize Ra'yi. And this Ra'yi is not as in it questions the person's loyalty. So no one ever questioned Umar al-Khattab's loyalty to the Quran and Sunnah. So, but you have examples such as Umar al-Khattab doing away the category of those whose hearts will be softened to be eligible for zakat, not cutting the hand of the thief in the year of famine, whether uttering talaq 3 times should be 1 or 3. These are all cases of Umar al-Khattab anhu, where he says that the purpose behind the hukam was X, Y, Z, and that purpose is not being fulfilled, therefore the hukam is going to be such. And he's not saying that Allah's Messenger said this something to the contrary. No, he's saying this is what was intended by the law. Alright, and these examples have been discussed in great detail and listed by Sheikh Ramadan Bhuti rahimahullah in his book Dawabit al-Maslaha. Alright, so if you want to find these examples of Umar al-Khattab and discussed in detail and how to show that it is very much consistent with it's a methodology that Umar al-Khattab applied quite consistently, then you should refer back to the book Dawabit al-Maslaha of Sheikh Ramadan Bhuti. So there is a clear notion amongst the Sahaba of Ra'yi being applied, right? Of Ra'yi being applied, and some Sahaba are more willing to engage with it, and there are other Sahaba that are less willing to engage with it. They will try to refrain as much as possible. That distinction is there, but then this comes back to, number one, is slightly methodological, but the methodological thing is still in its rudimentary stages. A lot of it comes back to a person's mizaj, the outlook, the way they approach certain things, how someone has a habit of rationalizing things and others don't want to do that. So we have examples of Abu Hurairah and Ibn Abbas having a debate, and you have Ibn Abbas applying a bit more of a Ra'yi method, and Abu Hurairah applying a less type of Ra'yi method, more of a literalist method of saying, well, this is what the text is. We saw the example of the Banu Qurayza and the issue of praying Salah as well. There's a case of a person following what they believe to be the purpose of the law, and one saying, well, this is what the law said. Right? So this kind of distinction is very early on, and we can see the traces of this during the era of the Sahaba. The next segment, we're going to delve a bit more deeper into the development of these so-called two apparent schools. So that's the bit about the early the issue of the distinction between Ra'yi and Hadith amongst the Sahaba. Now, of course, we spoke about it before about the geographical division, and I did say that Sheikh Salah al-Hajj in Madakh al-Mufassal does give a great background to the various juristic schools which are geographical located, and he mentions the scholars in each. I'm just going to quickly mention, for example, so the 7 jurists of Medina. So in Medina, in the 1st century, you have the 7 famous jurists. That's Ubaydullah ibn Abdullah ibn Utbah ibn Mas'ud. It's probably good to know these names. Urwa ibn Zubayr ibn Awwam, the brother of Abdullah ibn Zubayr, died in 94 Hijri. Al-Qasim Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr died in 106 Hijri. Sa'id ibn Musayyib died in 93. Sulman ibn Yasar died around 100 Hijri. Born in the Khilaf of Uthman ibn Affan. Number 6 is Kharij ibn Zayd ibn Thabit, died in 99 or 100 Hijri. And number 7 is Abu Bakr ibn Abdurrahman ibn Harith, who died in 94-95, born in the Khilaf of Umar al-Khattab. And then the next generation in Medina, you have Rabi'atul Ra'i, which is interesting, we'll come back to in a second, who died in 136 Hijri, and Muhammad al-Muslim, meaning Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, who died in 124. And then the next generation you have Imam Malik, who dies in 179. Of course, that's just brief, there's many other jurists there, but that's some of the famous names. The Fuqaha in Mecca, right, you have Ata ibn Abi Rabah, dies in 115, Tawus ibn Kaysan, student Ibn Abbas, dies in 106, Mujahid ibn Jabr dies in 101 or 104, between that. Ikrimah Mawla ibn Abbas dies in 107. Amr ibn Dinar al-Makki dies in 126. Next generation is Abu Zubair Muhammad al-Muslim ibn Tadrus, dies in 126. Abdullah ibn Tawus, the son of Tawus, dies in 132. Sufyan ibn Uyayna dies in 198. It's quite late. And Ibn Jurayj is 150. And Muslim ibn Khalid al-Zanji 179. And Imam al-Shafi'i, he's not technically from the Fuqaha of Mecca in that strict sense of geographical, but meaning he also resided there for a while. And the Fuqaha of Iraq we spoke about. I'm not going to mention those names again. And then you had the Fuqaha of Basra, the likes of Abu Sha'tha, Muhammad ibn Sirin, Hassan al-Basri. Right, so Hassan al-Basri met 500 Sahaba. His father was a Mawla of Zayd ibn Thabit. His mother was a Mawla of Salama. Ibn Sirin's father was a slave of Anas ibn Malik. So that's in Basra, these Imams. And then you have in Sham, the likes of Abu Idris al-Khawlani, who died in 80, Shurahbil or Shurahil, Abu al-Ash'ath al-San'ani, Makhul al-Dimashqi. And then from there, in Sham was also Umar Abdul Aziz, Awza'i eventually. So he died in 157 Hijri, that's Imam Awza'i. So these are the scholars there. Now, there has been a theory which has been running in the more recent times, which is that the Ahlul Ra'yi are the scholars of Kufa and the Ahlul Hadith are the scholars of Medina. The Ahlul Ra'yi are the scholars of Kufa and the Ahlul Hadith are the scholars of Medina, and that's where the division works. And there's a very interesting paper which inshallah we will make accessible by Hamdan ibn Abdullah ibn Muhammad al-Humaydan. Humaydan ibn Abdullah ibn Muhammad al-Humaydan, which is entitled Al-Madaris al-Fiqhiyya fi Asr al-Tabi'in Ahlul Hadith wa Ahlul Ra'i Qira'at al-Naqdiyya fi Maraji' Tarikh al-Fiqh al-Islami al-Haditha. And in this paper, what he argues is that this distinction of Ahlul Ra'i and Ahlul Hadith into geographical locations, as Medina being Ahlul Hadith and Kufa being Ahlul Ra'i, this is an incorrect division. Right? There's an incorrect division. And just I'll give you one example just to explain how. Is that, for example, when he spoke about the jurists of Medina, one of the great jurists of Medina was Rabi'a ibn Abdurrahman, who is known by the laqab of Rabi'atul Ra'i. So if he's known as Rabi'atul Ra'i, meaning the term Ra'i is given his laqab because of his engagement in Ra'i. There's examples of him in discussions with the likes of Sa'id ibn Musayyib and accused of engaging in Ra'i by Sa'id ibn Musayyib, despite him being a Madani scholar, which demonstrates that the notion that he was a scholar that was from the Ahlul Hadith in the strict sense, but no, his name kind of says to the contrary. And on the other side, you have scholars in Kufa like the likes of Sufyan al-Thawri, etc., that are very much engaged in Hadith. So this kind of simplistic division, right, is not useful because it doesn't really paint the picture in the most accurate way, right? And also it doesn't really highlight what you actually mean by Ra'i, which we'll try to unravel inshallah. So in this paper, he gives a whole host of different points. Key points I've summarized here. He says the following. He says at-ta'athur. There's just some each point he details it in the article, but I'm just going to mention the key arguments he makes. Number one, he goes at-ta'athur bil-asatidha min fuqaha as-sahaba, is that both camps that they've impacted by teachers from the fuqaha al-sahaba. كثرة الحديث في الحجاز وقلة في العراق، بروز ظاهر الوضع في الحديث وبالتالي موقف من قبول المرويات، الموقف من التعليم والقول بالرأي، الظروف البيئة لكل من المدرستين ومدى الحاجة إلى اجتهاد وتقدير المسائل وفرضها. What does he mean by this? Is that he goes that each geographical location had their own Sahaba, and there was the idea that there was many hadith in Hijaz but not in Iraq. He challenges this, and that there was a lot of fabrication taking place in Iraq, and this is why they would not rely upon as much as hadith, which was much more accessible in Medina. This kind of simplistic division, again, if you remember when we spoke about Imam Abu Hanifa, so if the idea was that the reason why the scholars in Kufa were not acting upon hadith, right, was because they didn't have access to hadith. So because of the inaccessibility of hadith, they were using Ra'i. Now the opinion is very difficult to, if you think about it just practically speaking, right? Number one is that, let's say that is the case for the likes of Imam Hanifa. Imam Hanifa was holding on to positions because he was not aware of given hadith. Let's say that argument we accept it. Despite the fact that him going for Hajj and Umrah, he had chance to learn about these hadith and Masai, but let's say he didn't. No worries. But we know that Imam Muhammad did travel to Medina and actually learned the most important book in Medina at that time, which was the Muwatta Imam Malik. Despite that, he keeps his affiliation to Imam Abu Hanifa. And the Hanafi madhab then, if you don't want to put, Abu Hanifa has engaged from a very early on with these other hadith. So this kind of notion that the Ra'yi was done because of the point that hadith was not was not accessible to them, he argues that it's not correct. The idea that the position of ta'leel and qawl bil Ra'yi. Now again, what this kind of comes back to then is if you want to define it, because I haven't defined it yet. I've used the word Ra'yi hadith and whatever, right? But you can apply that to any jurist, like I say, except the Zahiris, who explicitly oppose all forms of ta'leel. But if you're any scholar of any jurist that accepts qiyas, which is the vast majority of the ulama, then why are you not Ahlul Ra'yi? Why is Imam Ahmed not Ahlul Ra'yi? Why is the Shafi'i not Ahlul Ra'yi? Right? So here, the question comes back to is that how do the jurists approach the Sharia? How do the jurists approach the Sharia? What do I mean by this? The scholars of Ra'yi, who are given that label, they would have an understanding of the Sharia which is far more, which is based upon the fact that there is consistency in law. There's a rationality behind law. So most things can be understood via rational lens. So when the Messenger of Allah ﷺ says a hukam, there tends to be a rational explanation to a consistent explanation to it. So for example, let's give like one example, right? When the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, he talks about the urine of a baby, right? We talk about the urine of a baby. Is there distinct? Is the distinction be made based upon gender? Because the hadith suggests that if a baby boy urinates on one's clothing, one can just sprinkle water over it. But if a baby girl was to urinate, then you pour water over it and you clean it. Now, this hadith suggests that the urine of the baby girl is different to the urine of the baby boy. But now you have an issue. Right, so it's not, the Hanafis are not going back and saying, let's go look at what science has got to say. Let's see what I think about that. They say, no. What does the Sharia say about urine? So once this boy and girl become older, is there any distinction of urine based upon gender? Right, if you have a mature boy, a man and woman, in the impurity of the urine, is there any gender difference? The answer is no. If there's no gender difference there, and there doesn't seem to be any apparent gender difference with their baby, any other hukam like this, right? Then there shouldn't really be a distinction, right? There's no distinction. But there seems to be a distinction from the Prophet ﷺ. So now let's explain it based upon rational grounds. The Messenger of Allah says sprinkle water and pour water. Well, then maybe this is to do with because it's a rational ruling, right? Because you're trying to apply it, because we know it's impure. But then there seems to be an exception. But why is exception? There must be a rational explanation to it. Well, the explanation maybe, as Imam Tahawi suggests, is that the pathway for how a baby boy urinates is more narrow. Therefore, for a person to wash the necessary place is more easier. So when it comes to pouring water on it, or the word you use sprinkle, it doesn't mean sprinkle in the sense of just flicking water on it. He's saying that it's more easy to purify. Therefore, you can easily put it on the place that the urine is. In contrast to actually washing the whole thing, well, because the pathway for the baby girl to urinate will be much more widespread. So this is an example of Ra'yi being applied, whereas the other scholars will say, well, the hadith says that both one is najis and the other one suggests it's not. We accept it. In both cases, it's not trying to do hukam against what the Messenger of Allah is doing, and it's not a ra'yi based upon just what one personal whims is. Rather, that ra'yi is based upon what the Sharia has told us and what we know maqtu' bihi, definitively, the hukm of urine. Okay, so when we say Ahlul Ra'yi, it's talking about a approach to the Sharia which is much more like this, in contrast to approach to Sharia which is more literal. And we can give numerous examples of it. So it's not a set method. Why? Because there will be numerous other places in which even other people that are meant to be from Ahlul Hadith would also apply a Ra'yi based approach where the Zahir of the Hadith is not acted upon. Right, that's an important distinction, and we're going to highlight a couple of other points inshallah in the last segment. Now, historically, the term ra'i had so once beyond the Sahaba now, it has been used derogatively, and it's been also used as a descriptive analysis. Right. So when the Hanafis, if they were to say that we are Ahlul Ra'i, then that's used as a praiseworthy quality, saying that look, we are people that use our minds, we are rational, intelligent people, in contrast to those who do not use their minds. And you'll find other people, when they're using it to sometimes describe other scholars, right, trying to describe other scholars with the term ra'i, they may be used, especially for the scholars of hadith, they tend to be using it derogatively. So it's important to, so when they're saying ra'i derogatively, in that scholar's opinion, these people are using ra'i to dismiss hadith. So for example, in the previous segment, the example given of the urine of the baby, a person may come along and say, you Hanafis are rejecting the prophetic command of making a distinction between urine based upon gender. And the Hanafis will turn around and say, well, no, we're not rejecting the Prophet's command. We're understanding the Prophet's command by what we definitely know the Prophet said, which is regarding the impurity of urine for adults, in which there is no distinction between gender. Right? But if someone perceives it as such, they will say this is ra'i, which goes against the Quran and Sunnah. Right? This is ra'i that goes against the Quran and Sunnah, and therefore those use this ra'i as an example of condemnable ra'i. So just an example, I'll give two examples, one of used in a negative sense, one used in a positive sense. It's narrated by... yes, here we are. So he says, this is from the Sir A'lam ibn Bala, under the entry of Ibrahim ibn Khalid ibn Yaman, Abu Thawr, under the entry of Abu Thawr, where he says, قال أبو ثور, with the Sanad, he goes, قال أبو ثور كنت أنا وإسحاق بن راهوي وحسين قرابيسي وذكر جماعة من العراقيين ما تركنا بدعتنا حتى رأينا شافعي. Right, so he goes, Abu Thawr goes, I was with Ishaq ibn Rahowi, Hussein al-Qarabisi, and he mentioned another group of scholars. He goes, we did not leave our bid'ah, meaning we did not leave our bid'ah until we saw a Shafi'i. Right, so that's Iraqi scholar, we didn't leave our bid'ah until we saw a Shafi'i. And then what is the bid'ah now referring to? He goes, the bid'ah here is referring to ra'i. Why? Because previously he says, أَثَوْ رَجَعَ عَنِ الرَّأْيِ الْحَدِيثِ. So he removed himself from ra'i, which is a method of the scholars of the Hanafi scholars and the Kufan scholars, which is much more associated with them. But as you said, it's not just geographically located to Kufa. And he goes, we left ra'i for hadith, and here the term ra'i, or the process of ra'i, is described as a bid'ah. And Ash-Shafi'i was the one that told us to guide us in the correct way. Right? That's ra'i we use in a derogative sense. In contrast, ra'i can also be used as a descriptive sense. Because if you're saying ra'i are those who understand the Sharia as being ma'kul, as being consistent, there's consistent rational principles that underlies the Sharia rather than just ad hoc rulings, then the Ashabul Ra'i can be used as a descriptive sense, in contrast to those scholars that are not on board with the rationalization of Sharia. Rather, they want to accept the Sharia in much more literal sense, a zahir sense of what the Quran and Hadith suggest. So Ibn Qutaybah, right, who dies in 276 Hijri, in his book Al-Ma'arif, he has a section on Ashabul Ra'i. He has a section on Ashabul Ra'i and the scholars who come with Ashabul Ra'i. And who does he refer to as being from Ashabul Ra'i? He says Sufyan al-Thawri, Malik ibn Anas, Awza'i. Right? These are scholars that come under Ashabul Ra'i. Why? Because when you look at the fiqh of these scholars, you see a great engagement with Ra'i. They're not just accepting the hadith zahiran. So here, this is 276 Hijri, Ibn Qutaybah passes away. Ra'i has been used in a descriptive sense, and potentially even praiseworthy sense, but it's more descriptive because he has Ashabul Hadith as well. Right? So this is where one has to make an important distinction. You also have praise, so that's descriptive. Then you have ra'i used as a praiseworthy sense, and this is cited by Abu Walid al-Baji, where he says, when he refers to about Ahlul Ra'i, Abu Walid al-Baji, the great Maliki scholar, says Ahlul Ra'i meaning Ahlul Fiqh من أصحاب مالك إلى غير ذلك مما لا حاجة إلى استقصاء هنا. So when the phrase is used that none of the Ahlul Ra'i from Malik students have mentioned this, Abu Walid al-Baji says Ahlul Ra'i meaning Ahlul Fiqh. So this is him referring to Ahlul Ra'i as a praiseworthy with the scholars of fiqh. That's why they call Ahlul Ra'i. So this is Abu Walid al-Baji. He uses the term in the praiseworthy sense, and a similar quote is mentioned by Ibn Abdul Barr using Ra'i in a praiseworthy sense. So it's very important for us to realize that the term Ra'i can be used with different connotations. So when you hear the term being used, it's quite important to know what the context is, lest we misunderstand. Now, when it comes to what we discussed previously about the Hanafi madhab, because when it comes to Maliki madhab, is that Ahlul Ra'i and Ahlul Hadith? Well, you see here Ibn Qutaybah describing it as Ahlul Ra'i or Ashabu Ra'i, and despite Medina is usually being referred to as Ahlul Hadith, right? But this is to do with, it can be a subjective analysis looking at the fiqh of the scholar, and you can see them applying these kind of methods onto the hadith. And you see Malik doing this quite a bit, so therefore he was described as such. There's actually a very famous narration that's mentioned by Ibn Abi Awam in the Fadail Abi Hanifa, the book that we mentioned before, where one of the Hanafi scholars, I believe, he comes to Imam Ahmed and he says to Imam Ahmed that why do you criticize Imam Abu Hanifa? So Imam Ahmed refers back saying that because of his khawdu fi ra'i, because he engages in ra'i. So then the scholar referred back to Imam Ahmed and said, then why do you not criticize Imam Malik, because you also engage in ra'i? So Imam Ahmed says, but he engaged in ra'i less than him, right? He engaged in ra'i less than him. And so here Imam Ahmed turned around and said that so he goes into ra'i. So the student turns back to Imam Ahmed and says to him that, well, then give Imam Abu Hanifa his portion of criticism and give Imam Malik his portion of criticism. So if that means that Imam Abu Hanifa engages 80% in ra'i and you want to criticize this much, then Imam Abu Malik engages less, then give him criticism as well. Because it was well known that Imam Malik also engaged in ra'i. So whether you want to encounter amongst them or not is a different question. Now, we spoke already about the lineage, scholarly lineage of Imam Abu Hanifa, going back to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu. But we also mentioned that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu was not the relationship of Abu Hanifa with Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was not a relationship of taqleed. Rather, it was a scholarly lineage. So you're going to have opinions that he opposes. So I just want to give an example of this, and we'll come back to why it's linked to Ra'i and Hadith in a second. So there's a very good book written by Fadl Haq Nur Muhammad Baz. Fadl Haq Nur Muhammad Baz, which is it's actually a master dissertation. It's available online, which is called Fiqh Abdullah Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu fil Mu'amalat. So these are these kind of works where they kind of gather the opinion of a given Sahabi or Tabi'i and they put it into fiqh chapters. So in Mu'amalat, there's example that he provides the position of Abdullah Mas'ud and then he mentions what the madahib are. So there are examples here of where Abdullah Mas'ud's opinion goes against what Imam Hanifa says. So in here he goes, how's it going? Anyway, I can't see the example right now. But whatever the case, he gives examples of it. So I want to quickly highlight that. Now, we also mentioned the influence of Ibrahim al-Nakha'i on the Hanafi madhab. We're not going to mention that again. But the Ra'i method, this is what we're trying to, what's relevant to us. The Ra'i method can be seen much more clearly in the fiqh of Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. Right, the Ra'i method can be seen far more clearly in the fiqh of Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, and because of that, Ibrahim al-Nakha'i was also attacked by some scholars, and it's not that known because Ibrahim al-Nakha'i's old fiqh was kind of incorporated within the Hanafi madhab, but he's not mentioned as much. So therefore, the criticism against Ibrahim al-Nakha'i is not mentioned. But he was accused of the following: he was accused of rejecting narrations. He was accused of he did not consider Abu Hurairah as a faqih, and he would do irsal. So these are some of the things that he was accused of: rejecting hadith. What do you mean rejecting hadith? He was rejecting a hadith, what was deemed as rejecting hadith, but Ibrahim Nakha'i was applying wider rational principles to understanding hadith, which may mean that the zahir of the hadith is not taken, and it would be seen by other scholars as rejecting hadith. So it's not that he's saying, I don't accept this hadith. No. There's some principles in play where you try to accept and reject hadith. With Abu Hurairah, he had a bit more skepticism in his narrations. So he said, we don't just accept everything Abu Hurairah narrates, we have to weigh up in the wider aspect of Sharia. And last, you do irsal, which is quite a common habit of the jurists, because the purpose of the narrating a lot of the times was to, with the fiqh audience, so you just sometimes do irsal, and there could be other reasons for that as well. So Ibrahim Nakha'i is the one who, kind of a lot of the main principles of Ra'yi that Imam Abu Hanifa is criticized for, it actually stems from Ibrahim Nakha'i. So if you want to make the criticism of Ahlul Ra'yi, we say that the criticism should go back to Ibrahim Nakha'i, because Ibrahim Nakha'i is one of the Imams. Right now, everyone accepts Ibrahim Nakha'i as a Muttafaq alayhi Imam. He's a haditha in the famous books of hadith, except the Thiqa Rawi. Right? People don't want to put that criticism back to Imam Ibrahim Nakha'i. So the point is that if the Ra'yi criticism will mention Imam Hanifa, you think that's valid, that yes, he's rejecting hadith or whatever, right? Then we will say that that should also apply, provide that same energy to Ibrahim Nakha'i. Whereas in reality, this is not actually rejecting hadith, it's understanding, qualifying hadith based upon wider principles, which are also established from Quran and hadith. The wider principles are not something that we invent, it's actually taken from universals derived from the Quran and hadith itself. Now, in conclusion of what we've just gone through over the last this lecture, inshallah, is that we've highlighted the impact of just Ibrahim Nakha'i on the madhab, but we've spoken about this division of Ahlul Ra'i and Ahlul Hadith. And although the division you would say is meaningful, but there's not a clear definition of it. So there's not like specific principles once you adopt, you become from the scholars of Ahlul Ra'i or from Ahlul Hadith. The reason being is because every single person in some instance takes the Zahir Hadith, and in other instance will take a Ra'i based approach. So for example, Hanafi is accused of being Ahlul Ra'i, let's say in a derogative sense, by rejecting or qualifying Hadith. But when it comes to laughing in Salah, breaking wudu, the Hanafis take the Zahir of the Hadith. So yes, it breaks it, right? But then in other cases, they will interpret away. So everyone does. There are going to be times where the madhab or the scholar takes the zahir of the hadith because they think the zahir is what is meant here, and there will be other instances in which they will they will understand the hadith in a wider, amongst wider principles, which they think that has to be qualified. It's just that the Ahlul Ra'i, or those who consider as that, or doing, sorry, let's do it this way: the Jews who does more of that will be deemed as being Ahlul Ra'i, and the Jews who does less of that will be deemed as being Ahlul Hadith. Alright, but there's not going to be a clear dividing line, and a great example is Imam Malik. Imam Malik will be famously considered Ahlul Hadith in the sense that he's a Thiqa hadith narrator, has a book of hadith, the Muwatta, one of the most famous books from Medina, which is usually deemed as being Ahlul Hadith. But his fiqh is very much Ra'i based, hence people like Ibn Qutaybah said he was from the Ahlul Ra'i. Alright, so there's not going to be a clear distinction between who is from where, but this approach that we've described, the one who engages with it more will be deemed more the side of Ahlul Ra'i, and the one who deems it less will be side of Ahlul Hadith. So there is a meaningful distinction because there is a difference in approach, but it's not clear cut with clear division lines. Right? And we also highlighted the fact that Ahlul Ra'i has different connotations. Some will use the term derogatively, some will use it descriptively, and some will even use it as a form of praise. So Ahlul Ra'i, if you use it among scholars now, would usually be deemed as a praiseworthy statement. But a clear distinction between Ahlul Ra'i and Ahlul Hadith, as I mentioned, is not it's not necessarily the most helpful if the division is not qualified, explained the way we try to explain it today, inshallah. So we'll stop our lesson here. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.